Welcome to Law and Life, the Levoritz Approach.
Hello and welcome to Law and Life, the Levoritz Approach with experienced attorney Yonatan Levoritz. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today we're going to dive into prenuptial and postnuptial agreements in New York. Yoni, thanks for being here. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Thank you for having me.
All right, well, let's start with the basics. What are prenuptial and postnuptial agreements?
A prenuptial agreement is an agreement that's entered into before you get married, okay, or before you use the words tie the knot. So you're basically setting terms and conditions for what your marriage is going to be like in terms of what's going to be marital, what's going to be separate property, what's going to be marital income, what's going to be separate income. And then a postnuptial agreement typically comes about when parties are having a rocky relationship or even in the middle of a divorce, where they go ahead and they decide, listen, we're going to set some terms for our marriage that we didn't set beforehand. And we're going to try and use our experience to formulate the best possible agreement.
What are some of the most common reasons that you've seen for prenuptial or postnuptial agreements?
In terms of prenuptial agreements, I would say the most common factor is the fact that people want to simplify their divorces and make their divorces less expensive. In terms of postnuptial agreements, I typically see them in reconciliation situations where people want to try and put their relationships back together, but feel they need some rules and regulations.
And what circumstances might one be preferred over the other?
Well, I always prefer the prenuptial agreement because everybody's going in with rose-colored glasses, and they feel like they can go ahead and make a good deal and everybody's happy and no one really wants to rock the boat. So, people are more likely to give in saying, oh, if you want this, this term, whatever, I'm not worried about us getting divorced, so therefore I'll give it to you.
Yeah, that's right.
No one ever is. No.
How do you approach these agreements, when you're drafting them, so to make sure that everything's fair and everyone's protected on both sides?
Well, it must be fair, because if it's not fair, it's going to be set aside, okay? Or there's a good chance it will be set aside. An agreement has to be fair and equitable at the time that it's signed and fair and equitable at the time of the judgment of divorce. So it's got to be fair. How do I deal with that? I make sure that people are getting a certain amount of something. For example, maintenance, also known as alimony or spousal support. Even if it's a short-term marriage, I will build in a gradual level of maintenance for a person to obtain over a period of time. And I'll say after 1 year, after 5 years, after 7 years, after 10 years, you'll receive a certain amount of maintenance no matter what. And then we build into it a certain amount of equitable distribution. We say, for example, listen, you know what, if we buy an asset together and that asset is ours together, then we'll go ahead and we'll divide it 50-50. We try and keep things fair and equitable, while at the same time making sure that we still get to recoup whatever money we brought into the marriage. So what we would do is say, well, I get a separate property credit for what I brought in, and these are my assets, and these are the assets that I'm going to keep separate, and these are the assets that I'm willing to share.
All of us have heard the term prenup. It's in movies, it's in TV, even people we know have had them. What are some misconceptions that we have about prenups, or that you find that most average people who don't really understand them that well, what are some of the misconceptions that they have about prenuptial agreements?
That they're ironclad, or they can't be renegotiated. Okay. If there are lots of changes in circumstances, if there are lots of things that have changed, you should go ahead and try and renegotiate the deal and go from a prenup to a postnup. Okay. There are many times people experience extreme success, and you want to go ahead and garner some of that additional money. Well, you got two choices. You can divorce me, okay, or in the alternative, I'll take what I can from you and I'm gone. It's one of those situations where you still have some control and power as opposed to leaving the agreement as it is. You want to put yourself in that bargaining position. I
think we see it mostly in at least in pop culture or whatever, as one person has a large sum of money and the other person, it's the gold digger idea or something like that. Is that common, or is that more just Hollywood?
No, it's common. There are lots of gold diggers. There are lots of people out there who are just looking to date someone or be with them for the sake of being able to collect on the prospects.
Sure.
They want to be able to collect on the money. And that's why people who are wealthy, okay, or people who have modest means or want to hold on to what they have, they want a prenuptial agreement. They want to try and increase the chances of holding on to as much as possible and giving up the least amount possible if it's a mistake. They don't want to put themselves in a position where they're completely exposed to what the law has to offer.
Yeah.
Which is not great.
Is when people come in and start and talk to you about prenuptials, if couples come in, do they we were talking about misconceptions before, like how do you kind of have to like educate people when they come in about their true purpose and benefits?
Well, yes, and I never meet with a couple, by the way.
Oh, okay.
You never meet with two people who have opposing positions. Okay. You don't want to put yourself in a position where you have a conflict of interest.
Sure.
So we meet with one person, husband or wife or future partner or whatever it may be, and we go ahead and we seek to basically explain to them what they have the ability to put in a prenuptial agreement based upon case law and based upon other things. For example, we don't just have mutual waivers of things. You waive maintenance, I waive maintenance. I waive equitable distribution, you waive equitable distribution. We don't do things like that because one of the parties may very well be broke, okay? And one party may have a very large discrepancy in terms of the earning capabilities. Mm-hmm. So you want to put yourself in a position where you're going to have an equal and balanced agreement.
So essentially you talk to one person and then that person then takes the agreement to the other person and they go over it with perhaps their attorney?
Absolutely. You must have two attorneys. You don't want to be in a position where the other side doesn't have counsel.
Oh, okay. Okay. So even if that other person reads it and is like, yeah, I'm cool with this, you're basically saying don't just sign it?
Absolutely not. You don't want to go ahead and be in a position where there's only one attorney.
Yeah, that's interesting because I guess I wouldn't have thought of that. I suppose I should have, but I guess it's if it's a simple one and you're like, oh, okay, well, this all seems right to me. I could see this being like, yeah, sign it, but you're saying don't do that.
No, you don't want to do that because what happens when things change?
Yeah.
What happens when there's a $500,000 pension or $1 million pension? You want to put yourself in a position where it's going to hold up in the future. Remember, fair and equitable at the time of signing, fair and equitable at the time of judgment.
What are the legal requirements that must be met for these agreements to be enforceable in New York?
Well, you really have to have full and fair disclosure of assets and liabilities, and it has to be signed in the same way as a deed. Therefore, there's particular verbiage you need on the last page in terms of what's called an attestation page, where you attest to the signatures of the parties involved. Other than that, you can probably write up an agreement which is binding, okay, and probably come to an agreement which will be upheld by the court. But it really has to be fair in nature. If the agreement is going to hurt one party, the court's going to look at the more sympathetic party and try and help them out.
How does it work when divorce comes in and you've got this prenup and, or a postnuptial agreement, I guess I should say too, either one? How does it affect the property division, the spousal maintenance and other financial matters? Because you mentioned earlier, they're not ironclad. So how does that process work when a divorce is in process?
Well, if an agreement is fair on its face, the court should enforce it.
Okay.
So if the agreement is fair, and I'm not saying it gives what the law provides, I'm just saying if it's fair. Therefore, if you were married for 5 years and you're going to end up getting, I'm making this number up, a couple of $1,000s a month in maintenance, and it's a 5-year marriage and it wasn't very long, the court's going to look to enforce what parties wanted when they first got married or when they set up their postnuptial agreement.
I'm imagining that if things were to change, like if that money kind of goes poof and then they decide to get divorced, when looking at the prenuptial agreement, if the money doesn't exist, it can't really be divided. So does the parts of it get pulled out or is it just kind of null and void if something like that happens?
No, it is not null and void. You have obligations. It's like a car lease or a loan or a bank loan or a mortgage. When you sign that piece of paper, you better be ready to make those payments when the time is due.
Okay.
When the time comes.
And if the financial situation changes, how does that change anything?
No, not really, because it's not based upon, it depends how you draft the agreement, of course. But if the financial circumstances change, it doesn't change the fact that you promised to pay $1,000 per month, and I'm making this up, in a 1-year marriage for 12 months.
Mhm.
You have that obligation, and you have to make sure that you can meet that obligation no matter what.
No matter what.
That's
Okay.
why you have to put yourself in a position where you have the money to fund this particular agreement, which is why, even though complete waivers would be a nice thing where you say, oh, I'm not going to take, you're not going to take, we love each other, we're just going to go off on our own and live life. Well, it doesn't work that way. You have apartments, you have rent, you have mortgages, you have other things that come about as a result of the economic partnership of the marriage. So therefore, you better find a way to make those payments. If the other side's going to enforce it, you're going to have to pay it.
Yeah. If a prenuptial agreement is poorly drafted, perhaps, or maybe even unfair, how can that be challenged in court?
Well, you make a motion to have it set aside, and you point out how unfair it is. For example, in one case that I didn't work on personally on the trial level, I did the appellate work, but not the trial level work. Okay. The agreement was deemed to be unfair as a result of the fact that the wife became disabled. Okay. And there was no maintenance for her. There was a maintenance waiver, and there was no provision for her to get equitable distribution because there was just a waiver. When the parties started out, they were basically on equal footing, except for one person having a pension he wanted to protect. But the court found the agreement to be inherently unfair and therefore unenforceable.
Okay, so how did that, if you could talk about it, how did that turn out?
Well, the wife basically was able to seek maintenance. She was able to seek everything that she was looking for as a result of her having a stroke or a heart attack or some other disability during the course of the marriage.
Okay. How do these agreements address more of the financial complexities of second marriages or blended families? Does that change how these are enforced?
It doesn't change how they're enforced. If an agreement is fair and equitable on its face, it's going to be enforced. Does it affect blended families? Sure. For example, if you have ongoing maintenance obligations to your first wife, and you're marrying your second wife is going to say, hey, you know what? I want some of that money back because you were giving it to your first wife. Problem is, when she married you, she knew that she was going to have to give that money to your first wife. So she's not getting that money back. If she wants that money back, she better bargain for it in the prenup.
How do you recommend a prenup, a postnup, or anything like that? I imagine it's not something everybody needs, right? Or do you think that pretty much everybody should do it?
I think pretty much everybody should do it.
Really?
Yeah. I think it's very important to at least set forth, at least a sum that you can afford to pay, because sometimes the courts are overly generous. Sometimes the courts give away a lot of money and you really struggle to make those payments. You've got a mortgage, you've got maintenance, you've got child support, you've got a lot of obligations, and the prenup gives you the opportunity to go ahead and set your own parameters for these things. They have to be fair, but it doesn't mean you have to go as far as what a court would go for.
How does it protect people, if you have a couple and that they're modest, middle class, don't have a ton of assets, don't have a ton of money? How does the prenuptial agreement help them?
It saves them money because divorces are very expensive. A modest means prenup may cost, let's say, a couple of $1,000s, but on the other hand, a divorce at $500, $600, $700 an hour, it's going to cost you a lot of money. But if you know the house is going to be divided 50-50, if you know the person is going to remain in the house until the kids are age 18, if you know that they're going to get legal fees, to a cap or of some sort to say, listen, or you can get them for child support, but you can't get them for other things. Or, you can work out the rules and parameters for what you're going to be doing ahead of time. That way you don't have to have the court making decisions. The court can simply enforce the agreement.
I feel like pop culture, like I referenced before, movies, TV, books, whatever, kind of paint prenups as an insult. It's almost like if you were to bring it up to your husband to be, wife to be, whatever, partner to be, that it's like, why do you want that, or something like that? How do you, that seems like it's probably a misconception in your eyes. Like, why do people see it that way, and how can we make it so? How do you help make it so people don't see it that way?
It's very difficult that people should be able to understand, the concept of divorce and the concept of the fact that a divorce is more expensive than the wedding in most cases. The stigma around the prenup or even a postnup people don't want to confine themselves to the rules. They want to confine themselves, I'm going to see what a judge says. I'm going to get what the court's going to offer me. How could you ask me for such a thing? Because, I'm going to be a great wife. Well, we don't know how good a wife you're going to be. We don't know how good a husband I'm going to be. And therefore, you have to explain to them that this is like a life insurance policy. It's there not because you believe that someone is going to die imminently, but it's there in case something bad goes wrong.
I still don't think I'm going to ask my wife for a postnup.
If you want to remain married, I would say don't. I mean, like I said, postnups come about most of the time in cases where people are already getting divorced. They're reconciliation documents.
Right. Yeah.
Therefore, people who say, listen, I want to give the marriage a second shot, are open to discussing rules and regulations. It's the prenuptial agreement which has more of the negative connotation to it, that people say, how could you be asking me for such a thing? But the postnup, people cooperate with those. People say, listen, I don't want to stay with this guy or this gal if they're going to be doing these things to me. If they cheated on me, they sexted on me, they did other things to me. I want some rules and regulations and punishments. The court's not going to give it to you for adultery or for other types of misbehavior like that. So you want to set your own rules and parameters.
Good point. All right. Well, thanks for joining us on Law and Life, the Levoritz Approach with experienced attorney Yoni Levoritz. For more information or to connect with Yoni, you can visit levoritzlaw.com. And as always, please be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments. Yoni, thanks for all the information. Always appreciate seeing you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it as well.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.